Warning: the following podcast contains graphic content that may be disturbing or triggering to some listeners. Discretion is advised. The Papa Tango Delta Sierra podcast is available free of charge thanks to the support of Cracked Armor. Their mission is to raise awareness for PTSD, TBI, and mental health to support those who struggle. By creating an army of warriors who represent the gear, their hope is that it will send the message to others that they are not alone. Go to crackedarmor.com, say hi to Mark Long, read about the story, find some research information about PTSD, and support the cause by buying some gear.
(10-9) Did you say Papa Tango Sierra Delta? 10-4.
There's so much left to do, so many things I wanna say, and I say, don't make the change. If it rains every single day, I'll fight to blow it all away.
This is episode 4 of the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. My name is Larry Payton. I've been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress. This podcast was never intended to have episodes released each week. I kind of thought maybe once a month, even as much as every 2 weeks. However, the feedback has been overwhelming. It's been fantastic. And so as long as people want to talk to me about their stories and share them with you, then I'm going to make the time to listen, to edit, and I'm going to make time to share. And if that's weekly, that's weekly. I feel very proud of receiving some of these messages, and even more so proud that people are wanting to reach out to me to talk. I won't give any names, but I'll just sort of give you a little bit of an insight into some of these messages. Hi Larry, I'm currently listening to the first episode of your new podcast, and I felt that I had to reach out to tell you that it is fantastic. I am the wife of an 18-plus year firefighter. The stigma attached to seeking help for these issues, especially for men, I believe is a huge part of how this problem continues to exist. I just listened to the first episode. Wow, I am so thankful for the brave people like you and Mark. I felt so alone and like there's a monster screaming inside telling me to just buck the fuck up and move on. Why can't I help myself like I help everyone else? Bravo to you and Mark. Thanks for your service and sacrifice, and way to go on kicking off a podcast and putting yourself out there. It's a huge step forward in healing. Hey, just wanted to say I'm loving your podcast. The conversation between you and Mark really hit home. Keep up the amazing work, Sister in Blue. I just listened to your third podcast, another winner. I struggle every day to get anything done in a timely fashion. Keep up what you're doing. It hits home. I pray every day to walk out of my darkness and realize what I'm capable of. If you would ever like to speak to someone working on overcoming PTSD from military sexual trauma, I would be interested. Just listen to the podcast you did with Such. Wanted to express how well done that was, and how beneficial it is to see a domino effect of participation from Sean through Such and then through your channel. I myself have been diagnosed with PTSD, and after fighting for 2 years, I am finally back in uniform. Now that my eyes are so open to the signs and symptoms of trauma all around me, it's so important to keep talking about this stuff. God bless you, brother. I might take you up on a chat sometime, but I can't be on an episode. I can't afford to get fired. Just listen to your podcast. Wow, what an episode. Love what you're doing. I've been off work on leave with PTSD. Just last week I ran out of sick time and I'm now taking a beating financially for speaking up. And that's a small sample of what I've received. I just want to express a sincere appreciation to people who have sent me direct messages, emails, texts, and so on. I'm truly honored that you feel comfortable to talk to me about what's going on, whether you're going to be on the show or not, and it doesn't matter. But again, if people want to tell their story and want to try to help the brothers and sisters who are struggling, I will do this show every week to make sure that everyone is heard, that those stories are shared, and that we take care of each other. It's all about watching each other's six. Let's take a quick break.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the podcast. If you have experience with post-traumatic stress and would like to join me for an episode, please reach out to me. You can contact me via direct message on Instagram, PTSD_podcast, or you can send me an email at papatangosierradelta@gmail.com. Cheers.
We're back from the break. Thank you very much for sticking around and for tuning in to the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. I am very excited to introduce Jason Sobkowicz. How's it going, Jason?
It's going very well, Larry. How are you today?
Good, man. Good. I'm happy to have you on. Something you and I have been bantering back and forth a little bit on the Instagram and text messaging. And you made a comment that we seem to have quite similar views. We're both senior members of a police agency. Tattoos, another one. Tattoos are in common.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's a tangent line that will go down at some point here because I do have quite the elaborate and detailed story about tattoos in the policing world that I'm sure there's some high-ranking members of my force that would be happy for me to not share, but this is all public information, and I'd be glad to have some story time with you about tattoos.
So for the listeners right off the bat, you should be knowledgeable now that Jason is willing to talk and share some amazing background. It's, well, I think at times it's going to be pretty upsetting and disturbing. However, he's willing to talk, and so you're in for a great treat today. Tell us a little bit about you, your background.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. First of all, I just wanted to say, to give credit where credit is due, I'm really honored to have this opportunity, Larry. Breaking into sort of the voice of behind-the-scenes policing is something important to me. And being introduced to you through Mark Long, which is another part of the story that we'll talk about, has really been an important step in my journey. So anyways, that aside, I'm honored to be on your podcast and a little
Thanks,
bit
brother.
about me.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate everything that you're doing, everything that Mark Long is doing. There's officers all over North America that are kind of coming together to rally support for one another where this toxic workplace has kind of spilled over. And now it's in the media, now it's getting coverage here and there, and we're seeing the negative results of that.
Yeah, it's long overdue, Jason. Ultimately, we have to take care of each other.
100%. And I keep digressing about myself like I'm afraid to talk. But
No. Go ahead.
anyways, yeah, my name is Jason Sobkowicz. I've been a policeman for 18 years. I'm just about to start my 19th year of policing. I've been a small town guy for my entire life. I was born in a little place called Fort Frances. We are right along the Minnesota border and very close to the Manitoba border. So we're kind of like in the little western corner of Ontario before you get the prairie provinces in place. It's been my home all my life. I've been an outdoorsman because this is sort of smack dab in the middle of God's country where I happen to be. So I really wanted to remain here. And when I finally got interested in policing, lo and behold, there was a spot available right here in Fort Frances. So at the age of 24, I got my name out there. I began volunteering for the Ontario Provincial Police. For some of your listeners, Ontario is pretty unique. So instead of the RCMP being the police force that would work at all of the smaller communities, some of the Indigenous communities around here and all of the smaller towns and rural areas, the Ontario Provincial Police takes care of all of that. So the OPP has been around since 1909. They've been a standing police force in Canada since then, and they're one of the largest police forces in Canada. So I got my start with them in 2004 as an auxiliary member, which is you're a civilian in a police uniform. You do ride-alongs. You go to events where a police presence is required, but not necessarily in need of a full patrol uniform officer. And I really kind of got my feet wet in the policing world doing that as a young man. Fast forward 2 more years, and I went to police college, and then, like I said, got right back into my hometown of Fort Frances and began my policing career. I always wanted to be a policeman because there was something about me that just didn't like the idea of being in an office. You know, I wasn't the kind of person that could sit inside day in and day out. I really liked a really strong physical and mental challenge, and trying to find a career that fit that bill sort of led me to policing. I also knew that I quite enjoyed working with people directly. I was kind of a people person. I enjoyed being in a crowd. I enjoyed socializing, and I love to hear people's stories. And so it was kind of a nice fit being a police officer. So that brought me to the beginning of my career. And The start of my career, I think, was similar to many police officers. I was working really hard to gain as much knowledge as I could so that I could expand my career in a specific direction. When I first got on the job, I had aspirations of SWAT. I mean, you know, what young boy doesn't dream of being a G.I. Joe when you're a kid, right? So the ultimate, well, I mean, really, if you're you know, I'm not sure what you guys use as an acronym on the East Coast, but the OPP uses ERT. The Emergency Response Team is sort of our local go-to SWAT. And then we do have a level above that we call the True Team. Tactics and Rescue Unit, that's what True stands for. That was kind of my goal as a very young man. And I was really working hard towards that. I kept my nose clean like everybody else, and I was doing my best to perform at a high level. And then life happened, you know, and that's sort of the ultimate kick in the shorts is when life occurs and it's not something that you're looking for. I could stop right there and we can decide which way we want to go, because I have what I alluded to at the beginning of this, which is a very detailed and intense story about tattoos.
Yep.
And then I also have a few years later where I found myself quite mentally unwell and falling into the PTSD realm and being challenged by the symptoms of my disease. So I can kind of split my career, though they sort of end up coming back together in the end. But that's kind of where I'm at in this story here, Larry.
I would love to go down whatever path you're willing. Before we do that, just give listeners, those who either have never been diagnosed or those who are unaware of what it's like before and after, what's the changes before you were ever diagnosed with PTSD, before you joined the OPP. Who were you? What did you feel? I mean, I don't mean what did you do for work? I guess just, you know, what do you look back on now and go, shit, that changed. That wasn't me before.
Yeah, that's a good one, because it kind of creeps up on you and you don't notice it at first.
Absolutely.
And then all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, I'm a completely different person. What the fuck happened to me?
Yeah.
So, yeah, man, I guess the simplest way to initially describe it was I was a young man. I was in my early 20s when I got into policing. I had the whole world ahead of me. I was fairly immature, I would say, but enjoying life. I was a single guy. I owned my own home. I'm, you know, working in the policing field, and life was great. I'd never suffered with depression. I'd never suffered with anxiety. Up until I got into the policing world, I didn't even know what PTSD was. In fact, going back almost 20 years ago now, I hadn't even heard of PTSD. So that wasn't on my radar. And you got to think about, and I'm sure you can remember from your own career, back in the early 2000s, you never spoke about mental health stuff. There was nothing.
Dear God,
there was no training at police college. There wasn't posters on the wall. We weren't going to the road to mental readiness courses. We weren't recording how we were feeling at work. I wasn't having to sit with a supervisor and, you know, go over my feelings after having a serious call. So life was great, Larry. I felt good. I slept well, even though I was a shift worker. I'd wake up. Life felt awesome. It's kind of weird because you take for granted just waking up and enjoying a day, even though, you know, we all have our own stresses in life and not every day is sunshine and rainbows. But when you're not mentally unwell, life is just life. You take it for granted that you wake up and everything's okay. You've got food in the fridge. You've got a decent rack of clothes in the bedroom. You've got a home. You've got a vehicle. You've got your buddies and your family, and life is good. And I felt that way about my career too. And somewhere in early 2013, I had an acute one-time incident that really set me off. And at first, there was nothing. It wasn't like I recognized anything or that there was something on my radar registering that, okay, I'm fucked up or something's really, really wrong. And if it's okay, I'll go through, without too many details, I'll go through what happened.
Absolutely.
So viewer discretion advised, I suppose. One of my work partners and I responded to a call downtown. A person was being unruly with the bouncer at a local bar, and there had been a fight. We got to the scene. We immediately recognized this gentleman. It's somebody that we had dealt with many times over the years, and we knew he was a violent offender. We knew he had committed police assault. We knew he had committed other violent crimes against civilian members many times, and so we were kind of alert status red because we knew this guy had the propensity for violence. There was a pretty big fight. He was bleeding, and we got him back to the detachment. We got him into the holding cells, and you know as well as I do, Larry, that seems to be where all the best fights occur, when you're trying to get somebody in the holding cells, get handcuffs off them, and then, you know, shut the door behind you. So unfortunately, this fellow wasn't into listening to our demands and wasn't able to calm himself down because of all of the dynamic parts of the situation. So my partner and I were able to finally get him free of his handcuffs. And just as I was getting out of the jail cell, he rushed at me. So unfortunately, not only was I trying to lock the cell door, but I was trying to keep this guy from attacking me and getting out of the cell. So I gave him a bit of a kick backwards. Just as I was locking the door, he hauled off and spit a big loogie of blood right in my face.
Oh.
Not only did this guy spit on me, he had been bleeding from his mouth. And so it was like a bloody phlegm wad, and it landed in my eyes. It got in my mouth. It was all over my cheek. And I was just kind of in shock. I go to the constable's room, and my partner, having some immediate wherewithal of what's going on, grabbed a whole bunch of hand sanitizer. It was the first thing that was an antiseptic that was sort of close by. She smeared it all over my face and wiped off all the blood, and then I proceeded to try and wash off. And then my supervisor had to ship me off to the emergency room because I had to get tested to see what was going on with this guy's bodily fluids. Well, lo and behold, he had tested positive for Hep C.
Oh, fuck.
And the emergency room doctor, who happened to be my family physician, said, "Yeah, Jay, I'm sorry. He's positive for Hep C, and we're testing him for HIV right now." So, of course, my heart sunk. That right there, I think, should have been an indication, okay, I need to take this seriously mentally. Like, I'm facing the potential of contracting hepatitis C and HIV, and I've just had blood spit into my mouth and my eyes. I should have known right there, all right, take a time out and deal with this properly. But I didn't. I had to go on a series of medications that we have a very terrible term for, which is called the AIDS cocktail. They are essentially like chemotherapy in a pill form. I was at home off duty for almost 6 weeks while I was using these medications. And Larry, I don't know if you've ever had to experience this, but they are absolutely god-awful.
I have not, thank God, but I have heard nothing but absolutely horrible things about it.
So that 6 weeks was quite hellish. I was at home. Here I am with a newly minted marriage. And, in speaking with my family physician, it's like, okay, now you've got to practice safe sex. You've got to be careful of your own bodily fluids while you're waiting and going through these tests to determine whether or not you've contracted hepatitis C or HIV. So there was a lot at play here, physically and emotionally, and it obviously was wearing on me. But same thing, I was ignorant to my own demise. I had never really been given, as sad as this sounds, I'd never been given guidance or direction as to how to deal with my emotions that way. So there wasn't anybody saying, take some time to deal with the emotional side of this, Jay. I returned to work after 6 weeks. I had to undergo testing every 3 months just to be sure that I hadn't contracted any of these viruses. And thankfully, after all the testing, I ended up not contracting hepatitis or HIV. And during the course of the first, 6 months of what had happened, I had my very first panic attack. And again, there was another signal that I ignored that I was in denial of. When I first had this panic attack, I thought I was having a stroke, dude.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there having a relaxing time out in the forest, and all of a sudden, this wave of absolute physical misery just washes over me. And my heart started racing, and I almost had like tunnel vision going on, where the world around me was sort of getting really, really small, and I was really sensing my body, and I had no fucking clue what was going on. I'm so dizzy and so afraid that I couldn't even move. I was paralyzed by the sensations that, I don't know, I thought I was having a heart attack or a stroke. I got cell phone service and I called my mother. So my mother and my stepfather came flying out into the forest, and thankfully we don't live too far away. They drove me to the hospital. I got hooked up with all the electrodes and the blood work, and the physician finally comes to me and says, I think you had a panic attack. And I kind of looked at him and thought, a panic attack? What am I panicking about?
Yep.
Nothing to be afraid of here. I don't have anything that I'm afraid of. I wasn't sitting there having a negative thought, Larry. I wasn't sitting there worrying about or victimizing myself by thinking about the incident. I was deer hunting. I was enjoying nature, and bam, I got just absolutely slammed with this sensory overload.
Absolutely. I can definitely understand what you're talking about, and it just cold cocks you.
Yeah, it was really frightening. I honestly thought I was going to have a big one at the age of 33 sitting in a tree stand. So we're talking about, what did I notice? Well, maybe because of how I felt about the situation, or because I had a lack of knowledge I hadn't really started to put the pieces together. So, initially I had this incident that probably should have been dealt with right off the hop. I didn't do anything with it. I just soldiered on, took the AIDS cocktail, went back to work, and then boom, panic attack. I'd never had one in my life. Sometime after that, I had my first nightmare. And I really struggle to talk about this part, Larry, so just give me a sec here.
Take your time, man. Take your time. We'll take a quick break, and we'll come right back. This episode of the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast is brought to you thanks to the support and financial sponsorship of Cracked Armor. Go to crackedarmor.com, read the story, buy the gear, wear it to send a message to others who are struggling that they're not alone. Also to Willow Tree Farms, care of Jason Sobkowicz, another member who is struggling with PTSD and who updates his Instagram frequently to share his story. You can follow him at jason.sobkowicz. And we're back. Thank you very much for sticking around. This is Larry Payton again with the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. And we're still chatting with Jason Sobkowicz of the OPP out in Ontario. Jason, before we went to break, one of the things I sort of wanted to say was I understand exactly what you're talking about. I wish I didn't, but I do. It certainly sneaks up and you really have no idea why. And you wonder again, well, what the fuck caused this? I'm not concerned about things. I'm not worried about things.
Yeah.
I feel like everything is okay. I feel, quite honestly, you feel fucking like tough as nails, man. You feel good.
Yeah.
And then that's when things can really, by that point, I should say things can go downhill by that point, but they were going downhill before that point and we just didn't recognize it.
Oh yeah. Like I said, had I had some more knowledge, maybe I would have at least recognized it before it was getting bad. But going back to 2013, we were kind of just in the early stages of really, as police forces and as a society as a whole, kind of talking about this and trying to get a little bit of public attention that mental health was a real thing and that we had to take care of one another. And I was about to explain this nightmare situation because that plays a massive role in a lot of people's lives who struggle with PTSD and C-PTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So I'll do my best to walk through this.
You take whatever time you need, brother.
I had a nightmare, and the nightmare was what solidified in my mind that I knew I had something going on. It was sort of like the sledgehammer to the forehead. Okay, Jay, something's fucked up inside because this doesn't, we've all had our nightmares, but everybody's nightmares are so weird and out there. You recognize it as a nightmare and you recognize it as like some fantastical hallucination in your brain. You don't attribute it to a real world situation. It doesn't have a lasting emotional connection. But a nightmare associated with trauma is 100% attached to you emotionally. And that's where the real reckoning is, because how do you walk away from something that feels so real, something that's literally tethered to your mind? So the first nightmare I had, and this became sort of like the habitual deja vu nightmare. I had a dream where I was mourning the death of my wife because she died from AIDS that I gave her.
Oh my God.
Excuse me. In the dream, this bandit that had spit on me was just laughing on a laugh track in the background. I could just hear his booming laughter as he mocked the death of my wife because of what he had done to me. That feedback loop in my mind just kept happening every time I went to bed. And you know from your own experience, Larry, that when you start having nightmares every night, you stop wanting to sleep.
100%.
It's such a double-edged sword because you need sleep to heal. But when you're having these outlandish emotional nightmares, sleep is not where you want to be to feel safe. In fact, I dreaded sleep because I knew one of these nights I'm going to have a terrible, terrible nightmare and it's going to throw me right off. And waking up from that, and that's the other problem is, I don't remember almost any of my dreams, but I can fucking remember almost every one of my PTSD dreams.
Yep, they stick with you.
They do.
They're fucking deep and they're dark and they stick with you.
Yeah, and I think it's that emotional attachment. In my dream, I wasn't being harmed. In my dream, this had spilled over into my family. And it was like, you don't.
Yeah. Listen, I'll give you a break for a second. Hold on, just take a breather. I'll share one of mine that I have never shared with anyone other than my therapist and my wife. That's really fucked up. Is that, and likewise, there was no harm coming to me whatsoever. However, I worked was a death factory. It was my job, and it was where people went to die. There was kids, there were babies, there were adults, there were older people, there were males, females, every race, every color, and my job was just to go around and see that each one of these people died. And I'll never forget, the odd thing that really stuck with me was at the end of my shift, I went to a locker room and I was wearing some kind of a lab coat, and I took off the lab coat and I hung it up and I walked out as just another regular shift at the death factory.
Yeah.
And I mean, that to me is, well, it felt for a long time that's what I did for a living.
Yeah.
They're fucked up. They're really fucked up. Yeah. It's fucking scary, brother.
Yeah. And I know that probably most of us in the policing world feel this and share this sentiment. Society can do its worst to me because I signed up for the job. I know the stressors of the job and the potential for injury in the job. And that's okay because I signed up for it. So society can do its worst to me while I'm working, but you don't get to hurt my family.
Absolutely. Never.
And so I never wanted what was going on in society and with my job. I never wanted that to spill over to my family. I was the gatekeeper, I was the protector. And not only was I fulfilling this role as a protector, as a policeman, but I was also, as the father and the husband of a family, I was the protector there. And so I wanted to protect them from that part of society. And I also wanted to protect them from the dark part of my career. They didn't need to see death. They didn't need to hear about violence and rape and murder and all of the awful things that, you have to deal with as a policeman. So this dream was causing me this grievous emotion because it was involving my family. And I think for me, that was sort of the catalyst that really set me off, and it spiraled me downward. Like I said a little bit earlier, when I had that first nightmare, I knew, okay, this has got me. Now I know what I have. And I knew it. That first nightmare, I woke up and it was just like, no matter where I looked, all I saw was 4 giant flashing letters. Papatangosierradelta, man. And I knew it. I had that feeling.
Wow.
And then what do? Where do you go from there when you're 33 years old? You're attempting to do something good with your life. You're the protector. You're the one that goes to the call because somebody's suicidal. You're the one that goes to the call because a parent can't deal with their child's depression. You're the one that helps people. You're the one that brings people to the hospital. You're the one that society has said, you're the protector. And now you're the one that's sick. And now I'm looking at myself and I'm saying, this can't be me. I can't have this. I'm the one on the other side of this equation. I am not the equation answer. I am the fucking guy that's out there fixing people. I'm not the person that can afford to be ill. And that anger and that shame and that guilt I felt was strong enough to push down my desire to get well and to fix myself. And so I buried the never-ending panic attacks. I buried my nightmares, and I hid the depression that I was starting to fall in because I didn't want to be labeled the same way that I was labeling the people I was helping. And for anybody out there who has experienced this, I'm sure across the board, everyone could probably sing a very similar tune, that when you recognize you're struggling and you're involved or you're entrenched in a workforce, how do you just put your hand up and say, hey, I'm going to have to take a step back here, guys. I'm in need of help. Because at the time, and still to this day, the culture that we find ourselves in as police officers is not conducive to putting your hand up and asking for help.
Absolutely.
And so I was treading water for a really long time, just hoping that I wouldn't drown. I was hanging on for dear life. There were times on duty that I experienced panic attacks so bad that I almost had to hit my panic button. We've got emergency buttons everywhere, 1078 officer down. fuck, do you ever
Mm-hmm.
not want to have to press that because of something that you did to yourself or because of an illness you have, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
Just while we're on this, one night I was on duty. I was cruising around, and this was about my second or third panic attack. I still wasn't convinced that I was just having panic attacks. I fell into one. I drove my cruiser right up the emergency ramp to our hospital and admitted myself in my uniform because I was so embarrassed to call for help and ask for one of my partners to come give me assistance. So here I am on duty, calling on my radio to tell our dispatcher, hey, I'm going to be 10-6. I'm going to be busy at the hospital for a little while. Meanwhile, I'm completely incapable of executing the duties of my job. And I'm at the hospital being treated medically for an injury that I sustained on duty that I'm afraid to speak of publicly. Like, I mean, it's just such a comedy of tragedies.
It's a clusterfuck.
You know, when I look back at it now, it was insane that I had to do this to myself, you know?
It's a clusterfuck. And I mean, for what it's worth, man, I'm proud as fuck that you actually did that, because I really don't know of other people that would have the courage, the balls to do it. Yeah, it's terrifying. It's scary. And unfortunately, a lot of times people make some really poor decisions, really fucking sad, poor decisions. And I'm glad that you did that for yourself. But I mean, to get back to the sense of police culture, yeah, that's the problem, is you just can't talk about it, or it's certainly not welcome to talk about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could break that apart in so many ways, but, you know, it is a sad reality. And the big disconnect is that, and this is kind of going away from myself for now, but I see that we have police forces that are probably somebody somewhere in the police force genuinely cares that officers are committing suicide, that PTSD and other associated mental health illnesses are running rampant, not just in policing, but in society in general. There are high-ranking members that want to make a change. There are other high-ranking members that recognize they need to publicly say they're making a change. And then there are some members who are in complete denial. And, you know, you're mentally ill. Well, you either shake it off or fuck off and get out of our way. It's kind of how I have experienced some of the attitude within this toxic work culture. Sadly, the worst part of this toxic work culture, and I guess I didn't really clarify that, my police force and almost all other police forces across Canada have a program to deal with mental health problems within the force. There are posters on the walls. There is training programs called the Road to Mental Readiness, and they have all kinds of other acronyms and little titles. Our force has a little sit down that we do with our supervisor where we say, yeah, we're okay, or no, we're not okay after a serious incident. But at the constable level, when we're talking about mental health and dealing with it, at the constable level is where the root of the problem occurs. Or at least that's been my experience. And I know this because I've participated in it in a negative way, and I'll explain what I mean by that. You get sitting around in the constable's office, and it's shift change, or everybody's having a coffee before you head out on the road, and Officer A has called in sick for his day shift. And Officer A has called in sick for 10 other first day shifts. And Officer A said to somebody that officer was suffering from depression. So you're sitting around in the coffee room, and one person says, oh, fuck that guy. He just wants another Friday off. Or, he just needs another vacation day, or probably drank too much, or, oh, I guess he's feeling too fucking lazy to come to work today. The rest of us have to do all the work.
You speak the truth.
Meanwhile, Officer A is at home, holding on for dear life, afraid to admit what is wrong, because he fears that his comrades are going to speak terribly about him at the office. And lo and behold, that officer is 100% correct in believing that if he's mentally unwell, he would be treated unwell. And I participated in that, Larry. Early in my career, I was caught up in this. I was caught up in, there's a bit of a cliquey sort of non-familial nepotism within police forces where if you want to promote, if you want to expand into a specialty unit, mind your P's and Q's. You follow all the top dogs in your office. You don't make waves. You don't talk negatively about the popular people. And if everybody else is talking in the room about that Officer A who's off duty because he's unwell, well, maybe you'll give him a shot because the popular guys are doing it. And maybe maybe you'll sort of be in that circle and it will help you in your career in the future. And I'm just one person observing that from my perspective, but I have been told, and I have spoken to many, many police officers all across North America, and it seems to be the exact same thing everywhere.
The term that I really dislike, and it's still being used, we have one called ODS, or off-duty sick. There's people that refer to it now as ODM, or off-duty mad. And the mad is just because, well, obviously you're pissed off at something, you're pissed off at the outfit, you're pissed off, and so, they're taking the air quote stress leave. And
yeah,
it fucking drives me crazy because, let's be honest. Are there people who take advantage of things? Sure, of course. No matter what the fuck you do, there are people that are going to take advantage of it. However, do you just stop all of a sudden doing anything that may be right because you're concerned about the one or two people who are being assholes and taking advantage of it? And that's what it comes down to, is it almost just seems like this whole, well, yeah, it's off-duty mad, it's fucking just pissed off, taking advantage of this. That stigma, that's a huge reason why, despite the fact that I was told to take time off and get away, I didn't until I forced myself that it was really fucking bad inside my head. And it's exactly what you talk about, Jason.
Yeah, I've said this before, and I'll try to thread this idea again. I'm going to use an analogy that I used already, but it just works so well to explain what it's like. The analogy is the frog in the pot of water. Most of us have heard this story. You put a frog in a pot of cold water, frog will swim around, the water feels fine. The frog is completely unaware of the temperature of his surroundings because they're cold-blooded. They can't tell the temperature of the water. So you can put a frog on a stove, you can slowly heat the water, and as you slowly bring the temperature of the water up, the frog will be unaware, and if you continue to do this, the frog may actually end up boiling alive because they haven't felt the temperature rising because they're in the pot as it's slowly coming up, slowly getting hotter and hotter and hotter. But if you jump out of that pot, then you realize that you were boiling alive. And how does this relate to what I think is one of the big problems in the policing world? You're in a group of people. You all probably have very similar personalities. They call us type A or they call us alpha type people. We're all in this pot of boiling water and it's getting hotter and hotter. If you're sitting around and you're one of the people that talks badly about someone and then you find yourself sick, guess what? You know exactly what's going to happen if you call in sick or if you put your hand up and say you're mentally unwell. There's very limited options for what to do as a police officer. You're in the detachment. You're either going to be part of the crowd and you will actively participate in the demoralization and the handcuffing, no pun intended, of people that need help. You can participate in that. You can remain neutral and do nothing and just sit there and listen and go about your job and do what you need to do. And then the other option, the third option, which is the nuclear option, which is the you're going to be fucked anyways option, is you can stand up, you can look at that officer in his eyes, and you can say to that officer, would you fucking shut up and stop saying awful things about someone? But guess what happens to you when you do that, Larry?
I have a funny feeling, I know, yeah.
You're going to be treated exactly as if you put your hand up and said, I have PTSD, I have depression, I can't work right now. Because whether you are injured from work or you stand up to the verbal assault that happens within the workforce, you will be treated the exact same way. And I know that from firsthand experience now. So what choice do police officers have at this point when that's the stress and the strain of having to admit that you're mentally unwell? So you can stand there and you can be an innocent bystander. You can actively participate in being an asshole, or you can stand up and tell those people, hey, that's uncalled for, and I'm going to tell your supervisor. And then guess what? You're going to be ousted from that crowd anyways, and you're going to feel and wear the same result as though you stood up and said, I'm mentally unwell and I have to leave the workforce.
I mean, that's so important, Jason. In a sense, in my experience, I know that I had a discussion with a teammate of mine who was and still is struggling with C-PTSD. And it took a long time before I was comfortable even to talk to him, but it was a conversation with him during a 2-hour car ride that actually finally got me comfortable with saying there's something wrong, with putting in the document that again says, yeah, I need help. Otherwise, to this day, I fucking know I still wouldn't have, and I'm not really sure where I would be now because of it. That's the reality, is that we need to actually be there for each other and take care of each other. And I think the problem with that is, the nature of our duty is a lot of people lie to us. And so we just seem to think that whatever anyone's saying is just horseshit. And we don't seem to actually listen to our brothers and sisters when they're trying to talk to us. It's kind of like just the same white noise you hear, the same bullshit you hear, the same whatever. And that's a big thing that a lot of times I believe is missing. You agree with that?
You know what, Larry, that 100%. And I'll tell you that, so I've had a bit of a start and a stop with regards to the therapy I've been using to try and overcome my struggles. So kind of going back to my story a little bit so I can get to where I'm going with this. I left work in January of 2018 after I had a really bad mental breakdown on duty. In fact, I basically ran to the office, unloaded everything I could as fast as I could, and ran away because I didn't want to have a breakdown in front of everybody. And I was barely holding on, dude. Like the moment that door shut and I was walking to my car, the tears were flowing out of me and I was shaking. It took everything I could to hold it together to get out of the office the day that I broke down and knew I can't return to work. The point I'm trying to make is I started to go into therapy. And for 18 months, I was driving 4 hours one way to go see a therapist because I live in a remote area. There isn't any therapy close by. And one of the biggest problems I had initially in trying to return to work was facing my peers, coming to recognize that I was going back to work not as who I was, but as who I was plus the label of I have been mentally unwell. I have been mentally unstable. I have been labeled by members of my detachment as, pick your pejorative, crazy, insane, lazy, stupid, useless, good for nothing, liar, fake. And I knew this. I knew this, Larry, because I said those words. Because I heard those words from the exact same guys that I was going to go back to work with. I'd heard this song and dance for years. I watched many members fall ill mentally, and the moment they left work, that's what it was. It was Caesar with all the friggin' senators lined up to shake his hand and stab him in the back.
Wow. That's a fucking deep analogy, man, but I like that.
Well, your partner looks at you and says, hey, thanks for the good job, and then you leave work and they call you a piece of shit behind your back. My first attempt at correcting myself, at getting better, at moving forward with PTSD through therapy, my first attempt failed because I felt pressured by my employer to return to work when I wasn't ready. I also did something stupid, which was I thought, I've been at this long enough and I'm really sick and tired of it and I just want to get back to life. So I think I can just take what the therapist told me and then just run with it and do it on my own. For 18 months, probably 30 to 40% of what I talked about was how I was going to reintegrate with my peers after being labeled. And I was labeling myself at the same time as that, Larry. It's not like people were writing me letters or sending me text messages calling me names. I had a perspective from my work history that I actually had witnessed the way people were treated. And like I said before, I participated in this. I'm ashamed of that. I regret being ignorant enough and caught up in the pressures of the culture that I was ignorant to say something as awful as calling a person a name when they were mentally unwell. So I knew full well going back to work that there were all these labels floating around, that at some point my name had probably been used and had been connected to a whole bunch of awful language that described me while I wasn't around. And I really had to fight that. And I've talked to other officers about that, and I know that this is a real big thing. You want to come back to work healthy, and yet you are concerned that everybody's going to look at you and think you're damaged goods.
It's true. You're right.
And so it was really difficult. And I go back to work after 18 months. There are other things that are going on with my employer because of the tattoo part that, we can talk about later. But I felt like I wasn't treated the same anymore. I felt like I was an outsider. I felt like some people steered clear of me as though I was contagious, And this is just my perspective. I was perceiving that this was going on. Maybe some of it was, quote, in my head. I know that statistically people don't really think about each other very much, but when you witness how poorly we take care of one another, and then you become the victim of it. You know that that's how things are going. It's not like I was making this up. I participated in it. I'd witnessed it for years. Now I had to fight against it, which was a really difficult situation to try and overcome.
There's just certain things I'm speechless at, man. And yeah, I wonder a lot of times if it's coping, if guys are saying some shitty things just because they're having difficulty dealing with their own stuff. So I sometimes wonder, I know for a while I was very mad at people who would be like that, but I almost feel genuinely sorry for them. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm okay with being the guise of their pejoratives, but I can't help but wonder if that's sort of their way of coping. They're just not ready to deal with their own shit. I mean, there's no excuse. I'm not making a fucking excuse, but it doesn't make things easy. And I know, being off, I haven't returned yet, and that is a concern of mine. Just because, let's be honest, again, as police officers, we're used to paying attention to little things. It's little things that I look for all the time. Little things. A tone change, where your eyes are, the way you're holding yourself when you talk to me. Those are things that I look at, and those are concerns of mine of returning and seeing those little nuances that, there's fucking shit going on here. Like, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah, and it's who better to know how things are feeling except you as yourself. I didn't go off work until I had almost 13 years of a career down. So it's not like I was a junior officer that didn't know what I was talking about. It's not like I hadn't had more than a decade of experience. I was one of the more senior members at the time. I mean, we're a small place in a remote location, so people transfer out quite frequently. And so becoming a senior member around here doesn't take long. I've got 18 years now, and I'm almost in my 19th, and I think I'm about 7th in seniority. So I'd been around the block, so to speak. I was well versed in exactly how things were going in the detachment and what the culture was like. It's really unfortunate. And what you're saying, Larry, about this is a defense mechanism, I try to think about that. And it seems like you might be completely correct in that if a person is really hurting inside and afraid to get the help, one way of showing the people you work with that you're not hurt, that you still mentally well, is to act so overtly confident that you quell any suspicion that you might be hurting. So how do you do that? You hurt somebody, right? Hurt people. Isn't that the saying?
To me, it comes right back to what we do. And I could give a fuck. Anyone who has any amount of service and says they've never been absolutely fucking terrified on the job is just, I don't know, they're lying to themselves and every fucking one else. You're terrified. But what do? We still push forward. And we don't share that we're scared. We don't share that, fuck man, I'm worried about this call. You just push forward because that's what we are trained to do and that's what we have to do and that's it. And, I can't help but think the same thing, Jason, that it's people that are fucking struggling too, but they just don't know, they don't realize it, or they don't want to say they're afraid because, so many fucking reasons you don't want to say you're afraid, even though you are. I don't need to put, reasons in people's minds. I mean, you should know. Why the fuck would you not want to look at someone that, is your partner, is someone you trust, and tell them you're afraid? I really do think that there's a lot more going on with that, and there's a lot more members that are struggling. And that's why this podcast was born, is because I was one of them.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think you're completely right in saying that probably way more are out there struggling and can't have a voice. They're afraid to reach out. They're afraid to put their hand up and say, I need help, because we've proven to each other in the workforce that we don't help each other that way. And, I shake my head at this, Larry. I rack my brain when I think that I can be battle ready, wearing a bullet resistant vest, carrying a pistol, and I can go to the most hair raising violent crime. And then when I get back to the detachment, I can't look at my partner who we just saved each other. I can't look at my partner and say, hey, are you okay? Do you need to take 5?
Yeah.
I can't say to my partner, that really fucked me up and I need to take a minute to catch my breath. But I can go to war in a small town, potentially in a life-threatening situation, beside somebody who knows that I'll save their life, and I know they'll save my life. But we get back to the locker room, and when I'm away, or when they're away, we'll say awful things about each other behind our backs. And it just seems insane to me, dude. I still can't wrap my head around this. It seems so counterintuitive that brothers and sisters putting on battle gear can't protect one another in the safety of the constable's office.
Yeah.
Pretty heartbreaking. It's pretty heartbreaking, honestly, because if we could make the change at the constable level, because we're as far upstream as you go in a police force. And the number one goal of all police forces is to be operationally ready to deal with the cries for help from the public. That's the tip of the spear in policing. That's at the constable level. That is the highest upstream point. Everything that flows from the most upstream point affects everything downstream. So this is where we need to stop it. We need to come together at the constable level. We're not going to get upper management to do it. It's not a top-down type of system. That will never work. It's got to be bottom-up. It's got to be that we all start to recognize these patterns of misbehavior that we fall victim to, that we get caught up in, and we have to make those changes. We have to start saying, and Larry, you know as well as I do, and every police officer listening to this knows as well as I do as also, each police detachment has 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 officers. They're the same 6 or 5 or 4 that are at the forefront of every negative conversation, and they're at the forefront of every put down and pejorative and gaslighting conversation about an officer who is unwell. And if we could just sit those people down in some way and get them on board with this, if we can fix this at the constable level, then everything downstream will start to fall into place in a better way.
That needs to be done. I mean, as an NCOIC, that was a big reason why I decided it was time to take time off, that I was okay with it. In discussions with my therapist, she had mentioned, don't you think this is going to look so much more admirable and doable for people who are in a lower rank because you had the strength to do it? Yeah, that resonated with me. And I agree. I mean, you start as a constable. You've been through that. You've been through the shit. And that's where, the foundation really gets laid. And unfortunately, that's also where you tend to hear things like, suck it up, buttercup. This, what you fucking joined. This is part of it. It's no surprise. This is what you deal with. And yeah, it certainly does not make for an environment that's conducive to an open and honest conversation.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's different now. I haven't been to a police college in 18 years. It's been a while since I was there for the initial training, so I don't really know, and so I could be corrected on this, but I don't even think that anybody's getting this training. I don't think these things are being mentioned. In fact, I don't remember when I was away at training them saying that we need to take care of each other at this level, at this magnitude. We weren't trained in any way on how to effectively deal with mental health disease at a personal level. We weren't trained in any way to have tools in our toolkit for alleviating stress at the time, breath work, meditation, spirituality, exercise, nutrition, diet, sauna, cold therapy. There's all these free and easy things that you can do to mitigate anxiety and stress and depression as it's happening, instead of letting it occur for, well, in my case, it's been an ongoing battle for 13 years. Instead of it snowballing to a place where you either can't ignore it anymore or else you're a goner, maybe we could learn to nip it in the bud right at the beginning. And so this downstream effect, like I said, it really has to start right at the beginning of everybody's career, and has to be something that we all work on. Like, who wants to be halfway through a career and deal with this? Who wants to finish a career after 30 years of never taking care of your mental well-being and being the statistical 5 to 10 year retired cop who has a stroke or a heart attack because you've never dealt with any of the stresses of the job, right? I mean, this isn't just PTSD. Officers go through an entire 30, 35-year career of never dealing with the stress of this job. And then they stroke out and they didn't even get 5 to 10 years of retirement out of life,
The problem with the start is that's when you're full of piss and vinegar. And so it's usually about the halfway point or thereafter of your career when some of those fucking horrific scenes and critical incidents really start taking hold. And at least for me, and you notice, and I seem to think that a lot of people who struggle do come to that at least 10 years in and thereafter. And that's where the training, again, I agree with you, Jason, is necessary, because you need to know when you start the things that you quite likely are going to be facing. And I don't mean car scenes. I don't mean even critical incidents. I just mean your inability to deal with it down the road.
because we're just not fucking built to do these things and see these things and smell these things and feel these things. And, it's going to add up on you. And when it starts adding up on you, there you go. But that's when you need to tell them, is when they're full of piss and vinegar and they think nothing's ever going to hurt them and they're great. When you get the older guy, well, yeah, we know, but it's kind of too fucking late now. I mean, I passed all the yield signs and warning signs on the way.
And it's the same as me. I won't ever blame anybody for hiding for years. I did that for a myriad of reasons. I mean, we could talk about masculinity and why that's a huge problem with men speaking up when they're mentally unwell. That's a reason. Well, that's not the OPP's fault. That's society's fault. That's Western culture. So there's one part of this puzzle piece that's complex and dynamic and isn't going to change overnight just because we start to talk about it. But true masculinity, like masculinity in the workforce of the policing world, is something touted completely away from what I think true masculinity is. And I don't think masculinity is being a gorilla beating his chest and trying to be the strongest ape in the tree, because you're forgetting that you have all these partners that you might rely on to save your fucking life.
Yep. Yep.
So it's kind of like, I'll give myself as an example, just for fun. Here I am, Larry, I've been off work for 14 months. And I know, because people have told me, that every once in a while my name comes up at the detachment and a couple of people will have all kinds of negative things to say about me. That's fine. I've accepted that, but here's what I'm trying to get at. If I was able to go back to work tomorrow and strap on my gun and go and do my job, potentially I could be working right beside one of the officers who had nothing but terrible things to say about me. And yet, God forbid that officer ever finds themselves in a situation where they activate that 1078 button and they need life-saving help right now. Guess what? I don't care if you said the most awful thing about me, I'm coming to help you.
Absolutely.
It's really sad. That's really sad that that's where we're at. That we'll go save each other out on the street, and then we'll completely demoralize each other when the dust has settled,
Yeah, again, I think it's coping. It's fucked. It's totally fucked. I mean, this is where you get into the psychology of things, I believe. I agree with you in terms of the whole machoism and masculinity, and it just becomes this major fucking cope that you just don't talk about those things. You don't. Fuck, man. You just don't talk about them. And so, yeah, 100% we'll save each other out there. But likely, when we get back to the detachment, neither one of us are going to fucking say that we need saving.
Yep.
That's the problem. And that's where the disconnect is. That's where the shutdown is. And I agree. The dichotomy of it is fucked. But it just seems to be, that's the way it is within the culture.
Yep. It's completely counterproductive because we're kind of told. And I mean, you could take officers from something like the most elite forces in the world, the SAS, JTF, Navy SEALs. Do you honestly think that those guys treat their comrades this way? And I know that they're elite. I know that they are literally at the apex of law enforcement and military protective ability. They are top dogs. But the point I'm making is, if those guys treated each other in the locker room the same way that constables treat each other in the constable's office, they could never have a cohesive unit that could do the things they do. They've got to be brothers and sisters in arms while they're working and while they're not working, while they're well and while they're unwell. It's kind of like marriage, Larry, in sickness and in health, for better or for worse. You spend a third or a half of your life working alongside people. Shouldn't you try and take care of them? Wouldn't it be awesome if everybody who retired had a bit of a clean slate because they were able to mitigate their mental health illness through their employee interactions instead of having to bottle it up and then die 10 years later? I know that at a deep level, if you were to interview everybody, we all want that. None of us want to retire and die. None of us want to have our marriage end because we've turned to alcohol to soothe ourselves from the trauma of our life or our career. None of us want to lose our children. I mean, I think about, had I never put my hand up and gotten help, where would I be? I was just holding on, man. Like I've said this out loud now, and I didn't say this out loud very often, but I had mornings where I didn't want to wake up. I had mornings that when I awoke, I had wished I hadn't.
It makes me think, I don't know if you ever heard the song, I think it's Gary Jules who sings it, Mad World. And he has a line in it that, again, unfortunately resonates, in which he says, "The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had."
I know that song.
Yeah.
I've heard that, and those lyrics they're scary, dude.
I just want to say thanks to Jason for calling in. We're going to listen to the second part of the conversation with Jason on the next episode. Make sure you come back and hear the conclusion of this conversation. It's going to resonate. It's going to hit home. My name is Larry Payton. I have your 6.
Don't go
Please have money.
away.
Thank you.
There's so much left to do, so many things I wanna say, and I sing. Don't make the change. If it rains every single day, I'll fight to blow it all away.